Real quick. So, in this episode, we are going to discuss a specific religious entity. And I want to preface this that in no way, no means are we attacking any individual, any person that wholeheartedly, genuinely is part of this religious entity and is seeking out the truth. That's not our aim, that's not our goal. We have high regard and respect for anybody being part of that. We are not attacking the people. We're just discussing the system as it is described in Bible prophecy and end time prophecy. Okay, let's dive in. Pope Francis has passed away, and it's never God's intent for people to pass away. He didn't want that in the first place. It's because of sin came in the world that this has happened. And it's a sad ordeal when somebody passes away. I believe that God's heart breaks over having to witness that over and over again, no matter who it is.
Right.
But when somebody like this passes away and he's a very well-known person, it gives us an opportunity to kind of talk about his life, what he was up to, what he stood for, and that's something that we're going to do today. And in this, we are going to discuss how actually the Roman Catholic Church, which he was the head of, is actually mentioned in Bible prophecy, which not a lot of people know, but it's really interesting to talk about. So, Alex, you're here with us again today, and your brother James, you guys both have your own channels, Biblical Hope and Heritage and Hope Ministries. And Brian, you're here with us for the first time, and you are a frequent face on Alex's channel, Heritage and Hope Ministries. Definitely check out these channels. But you're going to dive deep into the Pope's life. Actually, we all are.
Yeah.
So what do you have for us today?
Well, as a Protestant, I think we have a unique perspective on world events and what exactly the legacy of Pope Francis has been. And it's not really our goal to denigrate him per se, but to just discuss his life and what his overall work was about. So a lot of people don't know that popes, well, at least I don't think they think of the fact that a lot of popes have traditional names, right?
Right.
So his name was, am I saying this right? Jorge Mario Bergoglio. So, one of the things that's interesting about his upbringing is he is the first Jesuit pope. Okay? And so, you see the IHS logo, that's the symbol of Jesuits right there. And then, James, who's this right here?
You got Ignatius of Loyola there.
Okay. And so you guys have done a pretty recent episode talking about Jesuits and talking about Ignatius
we
of
have.
Loyola.
We've got a couple of episodes about that on our channel. Actually, the first one we ever did was with James, and that has like 100-something thousand views right now, which is doing pretty good. Just talking about it. And then Ignatius of Loyola is actually the founder of the Jesuits.
Yep. So what's interesting is to look at some of his history, and it kind of talks about how far up in the Jesuit ranks he got. And it says in 1967, Bergoglio began his theological studies at Facultades de Filosofia, and that was on December in 1969, and he was ordained a priest by Archbishop Ramon José Castellano. He served as the master of novices for the province there and became a professor of theology. Bergoglio completed his final stage of spiritual training as a Jesuit tertianship at Alcalá de Henares, Spain, and took final vows as a Jesuit, including the fourth vow of obedience to missioning by the Pope on April 22nd, 1973.
So why are you emphasizing the fourth vow? What's significant about it?
There are very few fourth vow Jesuits in the world.
Interesting, okay.
And so that's very high up in the ranks of Jesuits. We're not talking like, I'm just kind of becoming acquainted with Jesuits and like, I like their teaching and I've been to a Jesuit school and that type of thing. We're talking like, I'm a dedicated, lifelong, that's my only pursuit, is to be a Jesuit.
So it's likely that they have taken the Jesuit oath then?
Right. And that's something that's interesting, and you actually discussed the Jesuit oath in one of your earlier videos that you guys just came out with here recently. And you can actually see there's been articles written about his Jesuit influence. So, there's this article right here, 10 years of Ignatian influence under Francis. And again, you can see the IHS, the sun. The sun right there on him. And if you look at a little bit wider out, it's not the greatest picture, but you can kind of roughly make out that it says Ignatius right there. That Jesuit influence had a profound impact on his papacy and what his goal was to accomplish. There's a lot of interesting quotes. There's been a lot of people that have been against Jesuit influence, specifically. John Adams actually said, if ever any congregation of man could merit eternal perdition on earth and in hell, it is the company of Loyola. You got to think, that's like some pretty profound statement right there from John Adams. But Thomas Jefferson, the third U.S. president, he said Jesuits are a powerful order and never were good citizens.
Wow.
So there was, at the founding of this country, there was a lot of discussion about Jesuit influence.
And to be fair, prior to that, those statements, they've been thrown out of multiple countries.
Yeah.
Before
Oh
that.
yeah, no, they had.
That.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, and you can go kind of deeper into the history if you look at some of your videos that you guys have done on that.
Right, and so the United States, the governments of the United States in the early stages of this country, they wanted to keep the Jesuits out, but they realized they couldn't do that and also encourage religious freedom. They had to let them in, but they didn't want to.
Right, yeah. So here's a little video. Let's go ahead and play this and see what he has to say.
And while he himself loved reading books of romance novels, what he found when he was recovering were Lives of the Saints.
Loyola read books about the lives of Roman Catholic saints, including Dominic Guzman, founder of the Dominicans, the order that ran the Inquisition. Loyola was influenced by their zeal for Rome and their devotion to Mary.
And through all these visions, he started getting the idea of how he could live this kind of a new holy life and dedication. But nonetheless, in his recovery, he spent a year in a place called Manresa in Spain, in a cave, and started having these experiences. And he wrote all these notes. And under this kind of spiritual guidance, and I don't think it was God that was guiding him, he came up with this kind of a training. And in the end, when he applied this training to other people, it was like a brainwashing. I mean, they literally felt like enlightened people. And in fact, they eventually got the name alumbrados, which in Latin would be Illuminati, enlightened ones.
The spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola are continued among the Jesuits and others even today. Yet critics argue that his visions supported heretical doctrines, which are often contrary to Scripture.
The spiritual exercises of Ignatius of Loyola are not just harmless exercises. They're actually exercises that were inspired by apparitions of Mary and demonic doctrines that he'd received from them.
For Loyola, the visions he claimed to have only confirmed the doctrines of Rome and the papacy. Shortly after their acceptance, the Jesuits were called upon by Pope Paul III to play a key role in the Council of Trent, the first major event of the Counter-Reformation. The council denounced the Protestant reforms, in particular, the teaching that salvation is by faith in Jesus Christ alone. The council declared, "If anyone saith that faith alone in the divine promise suffices for the obtaining of grace, let him be anathema."
Yeah, I think this is a pretty powerful bit, and there's a lot in it. But,
There is.
if we have to summarize who the Jesuits are, they were founded by Ignatius of Loyola, but they were, and there's historical evidence for this, they were an order that was supposed to counter the Reformation, out of which Protestantism came, right? Protestants who said, hey, we don't agree with what the Roman Catholic Church is teaching. It was a church-state power. They were the only ones ruling the world. They were ruling over kings, and they were basically telling people this is what you should believe, and the Bible is forbidden. You cannot read it for yourself and have an understanding from the Bible for yourself what you believe.
Well, Ignatius of Loyola, his one of the principles advocated for in his spiritual exercises was what I see as black, I will believe is white, if the hierarchy of the church so defines it, or I might have those colors mixed up, but you had to be a corpse in the hands of your superior, ac perende cadaver, like it was, you were to turn over all of your thinking capacity to somebody else. this would have precluded any of the actions of the Bereans in testing for themselves to see whether or not the apostles were speaking according to the Word of God. But the Jesuits would very much like you to avoid following the footsteps of the Bereans and testing every doctrine by the Word of God.
Yeah, they wanted you to be robots.
Yep.
Orders.
Yeah. Right. So, this is who Pope Francis was a part of. Not just to a light degree, but the Fourth Order. He's deeply into it. So one thing that's interesting is discussing the Jesuit Oath. Now, the Jesuit Oath, there's been a lot of controversy about it. This is a document that surfaced a long time ago, and a lot of people have said, oh, it's a forgery. Oh, it's not real. We can't verify it. It's not official. But the very nature of the oath, and I'll show it here in just a second, but the very nature of the oath would mean it would have to be secret, right? And we have enough other background evidence, which if you check out our previous video that we did with our ancient documents, our Jesuit books that we brought in, you can easily make the case for why the principles contained inside this Jesuit oath right here were legitimate, I think.
Yeah.
And so would Pope Francis have sworn this oath? I don't know. I think that it's not outside the realm of possibility at all.
Yeah, I agree.
But we don't know for sure. Only God can judge his heart. So, but there's some statements in here that are just positively horrific to look at, which I'm not going to sit here and read through all the different statements of it. If you want to, you can pause the video and kind of take a look at some of those things yourself. But it's horrific language, and basically the whole thought was to crush out any notion of Protestantism with any means necessary.
What I find interesting is that at the top it says, I do further promise and declare that notwithstanding I am dispensed with to assume my religion heretical for the propagation of Mother Church's interests, which is the Catholic Church, to keep secret and private all her agents' counsels from time to time as they interest me and not divulged directly or indirectly by word, writing, or circumstances, whatever. So, this was, by all means, a secret society.
Yeah, of course.
They had to operate in secret. And in fact, what I find interesting about the Jesuits is that when you read the book, The Great Controversy, and we can put a link in the description for whoever wants to read it. It's just based on, it's based on history, right? As historians, it's a history book. It shows you in there how, and again, it's not just in that book, it's history in general, that they were supposed to look like proper Protestant Christians, act like them, do the good deeds, visit hospitals, visit the sick, but then to be undetected among the Protestants, to plant seeds to point them back to Catholicism, bring them back into the fold.
Right.
And it's just interesting that goes directly hand in hand with the Jesuit oath as well.
Well, and there's direct evidence of that. You look at Manuel Lacunza's work that he published under the pen name Rabbi Ben Ezra. He literally assumed the position of a Jew, exactly like what the extreme Jesuit oath talks about, stooping so low as to become a Jew among the Jews.
Right.
That's exactly what he did when he wrote La Segunda Venida de Jesucristo en Gloria y Majestad. It was to assume that guise to get the evangelicals to buy it, more likely.
Right. So we have evidence that the ideals that were in this were carried out. Okay. Yeah. So, but kind of going on from there, let's play another little video clip and kind of take a look at this.
We must hold fast to the following principle. What seems to me white, I will believe black, if the hierarchical church so defines. The initial weapon of the counter-reform was based in doctrine and theology. But when that proved ineffective, the Jesuits looked to the use of force and developed a network of spies and assassins. At some point, they established a secret oath for those who reached the higher levels of the order. The Jesuit oath has been known for more than 200 years and remains a point of controversy, with some questioning its very existence. Nevertheless, the oath has been published repeatedly in books and articles, and can be found among the records of the Library of Congress and in the National Library of Australia. While the full oath is much longer, here we include those parts that might be considered the most important. It begins with a Jesuit superior speaking to a younger initiate who is already a Jesuit priest but is now brought under what is called the fourth vow of the order. My son, heretofore you have been taught to act the dissembler, but you have not yet been invested with all that is necessary to command in the army of Loyola. For none can command here who has not consecrated his labors with the blood of the heretic, for without shedding of blood no man can be saved. Therefore, repeat after me. I, now, in the presence of Almighty God, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and to you, my ghostly father, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, declare and swear that His Holiness the Pope is Christ's Vice-Regent, and that he hath power to depose heretical kings, princes, states, and governments, all being illegal without his sacred confirmation. I furthermore promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth. Go ye then into all the world and take possession of all lands in the name of the Pope. He who will not accept him as the vicar of Jesus and his vice-regent on earth, let him be accursed and exterminated.
So there's a possibility that if he was a fourth vow Jesuit, he might have said the Jesuit oath, and he might have been part of this order. I mean, we don't know exactly what all happened behind the scenes.
We don't know, but
There's a lot of historical evidence to back this up.
yeah,
Right.
You know,
absolutely.
And if someone tells you who they are, believe them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's an old saying there, and just the fact as well that there's 4 steps, at least it seems like, that kind of goes into the secrecy as well, because that gets into secret societies. They have levels to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the initiates don't know anything, and we're going to talk more about that here in a second. But you would assume that the lower level Jesuits aren't brought into that until they're trusted and groomed, and then they're you know. You get to the point to where maybe you do potentially shed innocent blood.
That's right.
Well, okay, so then let's kind of shift gears and look at how his legacy is being viewed by the media.
Mm-hmm.
So he's died. Let's kind of talk about that. You know, what's interesting is that a lot of the Freemasons, actually, the Freemason Lodge, actually hailed Pope Francis' work as deeply resonant with their principles.
Doesn't surprise me.
No, not really.
And they specifically mentioned Fratelli Tutti. I don't know if I said that right. James, I think you might have a few things though.
Yeah, Fratelli Tutti was kind of interesting in the sense that it did elevate those 3 values, not only associated with Freemasonry, but also the French Revolution. So there were a lot of people, even in some of the conservative Catholic side, that noted that, you know, why is Pope Francis heralding the battle cry of the French Revolution? And I think it's very interesting in where he takes that in Fratelli Tutti, because he goes on under that chapter heading to state that fraternity is not only a climate of respect for individual liberties or of a certain administratively guaranteed equality. He goes on to state that equality is achieved, or not rightly achieved, by an abstract proclamation that all men and women are equal. Now, where do we hear that statement, all men and women are equal? I mean,
That's in the Constitution.
Yeah, that comes from American documents. So we're casting shade here on American principles. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to cultivate is fraternity in this document. Where does that lead to? If you downplay individual liberty and individual rights and elevate fraternity and the common good, the principles of the common good, ultimately it takes you down the path for Catholicism to deny individual liberty and to establish more of an interest in the goods of the majority or the needs of the majority, but who defines what is the common good? Rome is ultimately the one who's going to want to define who is and who gets the common good benefit.
Yeah, this is Catholic Social Doctrine 101. It goes back to, is it Vatican II? Was that when that was initially kind of presented?
Well, it's not just Vatican II, but I mean, you can trace this all the way back to, the Middle Ages, where individual liberty was very, very low, and you didn't have freedom of the press then.
Right.
You didn't have the freedom to even read the Word of God in your own language.
Right.
I mean, if you were a heretic, you could be persecuted and put to death. In fact, if you were excommunicated, that was basically an open season that anybody could kill you without any retribution.
But Vatican II is essentially a plan of how to get back there, from what I understand. Is that correct?
In Vatican II, there's some complexities about Vatican II that are interesting. One of the things that I've observed from Vatican II is it continues the idea of religious submission of mind and will to the magisterium of the Roman pontiff, even when he is not speaking ex cathedra.
Oh.
So you had to submit to the Pope in all things. And it must be shown in such a way that even his judgments made, they had to be sincerely adhered to. It wasn't just a case of you could disagree and not go along with the Pope, but you actually had to adhere to the judgments. But also that individual bishops do not enjoy the prerogative, although they don't enjoy the prerogative of infallibility, they nevertheless proclaim Christ's doctrine infallibly, whenever, even though dispersed through the world, but still maintaining the bond of communion among themselves and with the successor of Peter. So it's still elevated papal infallibility and religious submission to the Pope. Now, what we see here is principles, once again though, with Pope Francis, that are trying to shift America and attack individual liberties in the Constitution to nullify that and return the United States and get her to bow down at the feet of Rome.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned, and I may not say this right, the ex cathedra, which is essentially a pope can say something, and if it's not ex cathedra, he can lie. It doesn't matter. But if it's ex cathedra, then that's it. That's what I understand, right? Then
that's the way they like to sell it to Protestants who would come along and attack them for papal infallibility claims. We have the claim, well, that wasn't said ex cathedra, therefore the Pope could have erred there. It's kind of a way to escape charges that are brought against the Pope, but as we've seen here in Lumen Gentium, they actually admit that obedience has to extend even outside of decrees that are ex cathedra. Therefore, the whole claim is it's really nonsense. If you go back to the time of the Reformation, infallibility was proclaimed all the time.
right.
And you had to obey the Pope. I mean, regardless, there was no, you don't have really ex cathedra being promoted as, well, only some positions by the Pope are infallible. No, you had to listen to all of them.
Well, it's such an erroneous concept, because it's like, what if I had like a relationship with my wife, but it's like, well, I didn't have my hand on the Bible, so nothing I said mattered. It's like, what? Like, come on, like, to say that it's only when it's ex cathedra does it really count? It's like, that's such a strange notion. Like, I don't know. I mean, by the Bible talks about, like, by their fruits you shall know them. If they're not speaking according to the word, is there light in them?
If you go back to 2 Thessalonians 2, when the man of sin sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God, when he sits there, the word is kathizo. So ex cathedra is actually, alluded to in 2 Thessalonians 2, where the man of sin tries to sit in the temple of God.
Interesting.
Wow.
That's cool. Kind of discussing Freemasonry a little bit further, it's interesting because the Vatican has actually said that it's a grave sin for Freemasons, or for Catholics to join the Freemasons. So, but despite this statement by the Vatican saying that, Catholics should not be Freemasons, there was a Vatican intelligence officer that confirmed Pope Francis is a liberal Freemason.
And this was actually a chief Vatican intelligence officer. Remember, it was a very high-ranking. And this is Argentinian press that are essentially discussing this, how they had this conversation, and that this officer essentially said that not only was he a Freemason, but Pope Francis also is a Freemason.
A couple of weeks ago, we dropped a documentary about The Chosen, which was our second documentary that we did. And in it, I mean, even if you're not interested in The Chosen, I highly recommend you watch this because this is it goes really in depth into the Jesuits and the Freemasons and all the secret societies. Anyway, so I showed this document in there. It's from a Masonic magazine from the 19th century, and they said themselves, yeah, so the Freemasons, they're actually run by the Jesuits, but the lower level Freemasons just don't know it. The high up ones, they know the Jesuits run the Freemasons.
Yeah, they also run our schools in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a little video clip here, kind of talking about some of this secret society stuff, and I thought this is illuminating. You got to watch this.
The Fourth Revolution, theorized by Klaus Schwab, in the family of international finance, find in Bergoglio not a neutral spectator, which would itself already be an unheard of thing, but actually a zealous cooperator who abuses his own moral authority in order to support a destra outside the church the project of the dissolution of traditional society. While ad intra within the church, he pursues the project of the demolition of the church in order to replace her with a philanthropic organization of Masonic inspiration. And it is scandalous. This applies to both, to civil and ecclesiastical world, confirming the pactum celeri, the criminal conspiracy between the deep state and the deep church. It seems to me that in this conspiracy the role of the Jesuit has been decisive. It is no coincidence that for the first time in history a religious of the Society of Jesus is seated on the throne of Peter.
So who is this?
This is an archbishop. He was actually excommunicated.
Is it Vigano?
Carlos. I think that's right. Yeah.
Oh, he's critical of the Pope.
He was actually why he was excommunicated was for being critical of Pope Francis. So you've had multiple people kind of insinuate that Pope Francis is a Freemason. So you have right here, that's a soon-to-be Pope Francis with Pope Benedict, and that's a Masonic handshake right there. And then he's also with Queen Elizabeth prior to the handshake. And this is the hidden hand. This is also a Masonic sign, also known as the sign of the Master of the Second Veil. And you can see George Washington, Napoleon, and then Stalin as well.
They were all Freemasons.
All Freemasons,
yeah.
And here's some more as well. You might recognize some of these people: Ted Cruz, Obama, and that's actually Anthony Fauci, who made a spectacle. There's a video, if you look on YouTube, where he walks out in a press conference and does this and kind of looks around the room, and then puts his hand down.
So some people might think, oh, this is just a bunch of bogus, but I actually knew a former Freemason once. We tried to interview him for the show, and our audio was corrupted, and we never actually aired it, but he was saying this is a real thing that they do in Freemasonry, where they have hand signals. So, for example, if they go to a court and you're a criminal and you know the judge is a Freemason, you throw up a certain sign that they know and they'll let you go. But like his grandpa was a high up Freemason, his great grandfather was a high up Freemason, and he was a Freemason. So this is not coming from some random source. Like, he knew about this and he confirms this. Right. The signs that they do.
No, that's real, and I think they like to flaunt it in your face. It's for the goyim or the sheep, the people who aren't enlightened, not on the elite level that they consider themselves.
Yeah.
And there's also an occult outlook that they have to tell you these things. They have to show you what they're going to do and tell you what they're going to do. And if you don't respond, then it's essentially giving them permission in their mind. So there's this occult mindset where they have to kind of telegraph what they're going to do.
And it's interesting too, I don't wear suits, you guys wear suits.
Yeah.
How often do you really stand there with your hand in your pocket.
Never.
Like, unless you're like scratching yourself quickly or something.
I mean,
but,
I might reach in and grab something, but I'm never like just sitting there like, yes.
Like right here. Like, that's odd.
Especially in the public eye. This with Ted Cruz, he's actually, on the other side of him is would be Trump and then Jeb Bush. No. And, they both have their hand over because they were doing like the Pledge of Allegiance or whatever beforehand. But that slip of the hand inside, that's purposeful. And he knows cameras are on him. So that is 100% on purpose.
So, kind of talking then about some of his background, then what happened? We know that he caught pneumonia, and he battled pneumonia for a long time. It's really interesting to see that they actually released this photo right here of him dressed in plains clothes because, a public figure like him, you kind of have this person in your mind as like this elevated position, this elevated, stature and regal robe and everything. But to see him brought down to, he's just a little old man wearing oxygen, but being very carefully guarded. We know that he had pneumonia for a while, and we know that...
He does not look good in this picture.
No, he does not look good. No.
We're both medical professionals, and I think you would agree with me, Alex. He looks very frail, like he's on his last legs there.
Yes, very much so. And you can actually see that in this next video clip, which isn't the best quality, but let's just watch it for just a second. So, I mean, he looks completely worn out there.
Yeah.
Well, supposedly he had it started with a stroke, right? Later on that night. I mean, looking at that video, cognitively, like, he does not look right in that video to me at all.
No, and I think we can see he was approaching the end of his life for sure. Which, it's not outside the realm of possibility. If you have somebody with pneumonia, it puts a lot of strain on the heart. You're more prone to arrhythmias, which can cause stroke. And so it's not surprising at all that he passed away from stroke.
But to me, he looks like someone who may have even had a stroke before that.
He could have.
Or maybe right then, just the way he's acting.
Yep. There's a lot of people that are mourning his passing, and I certainly feel for those people who are mourning for him. What's interesting is to kind of discuss how they would pronounce popes dead previously. Now, they didn't do that from all accounts that I could find this time, but in the past, they would take a silver hammer, and they would come to the pope who had died, and they would say the pope's baptismal name, and hit him on the head ceremonially 3 times while calling out his baptismal name. And if he didn't answer or respond, then he was considered dead.
That's odd.
It is odd. It's very ceremonial, very
Where did the hammer come from too? Where's the symbology?
I guarantee you there's probably some deeper symbolism there, but they don't do it currently. Apparently they diagnose it based off EKG. But have you guys seen this movie? Or heard of this movie?
We've made a video about it. Link in the description.
So this is Conclave, and it's basically a drama that talks about replacing the Pope.
That's what the conclave is in the Vatican. That's what it's called, is where the cardinals come together and they vote in secret on the new Pope.
Right. So Brian, what did you think about the conclave? What did you think about how this kind of set the stage?
I guess spoiler alert, if I'm going to give my thoughts on it, because I have watched the whole thing. I watched the whole thing through. It was very interesting to sit and analyze it. And of course, it's not a coincidence that it came out this year, right? January? December or January? It was
last year, but this year it won a Golden Globe in January.
But it was the end of last year. It's fairly very recent. So, of course, they're kind of telegraphing, there's no coincidence at all. But as far as the movie itself, there's kind of, they go into some of the secrecy and some of the politics and the conservative versus liberal. But what's very interesting is the Pope that is ultimately elected at the end So they kind of have this whole, like I said, back and forth. And it's a dark horse candidate that no one's talking about. And he was actually put in place by the previous pope. The pope that died in the movie set all this up in motion before he passed. Basically, you find out that this new pope has a dark secret that he's transgender. Which I don't think is a coincidence either. And you can kind of point towards, well, that's just the progressivism of Hollywood. But if you look into the origin of androgyny, it goes, there's nothing new under the sun. It has pagan roots and goes all the way back. Even if you look at Baphomet as an androgynous god. So to coronate someone like that, I think is very purposeful.
It actually goes back to the Jesuit creed that we read in one of the videos back in the day, where it talked about them believing in Father and Mother, like both God the Father and Mary, as hermaphrodites. Like that was actually part of the creed from, I think, Juan de Poza gathered up. So yeah, I mean that's actually something that's been featured in some of their older documents.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not attacking anyone who may identify as transgender at all, but the reality is, even if you go into websites from transgender people, they will tell you that the roots go all the way back. But this isn't new.
The Jesuitical creed, I just wanted to confirm that real fast. Yeah, here we go. I believe in two gods, whereof one is Father, Mother, metaphorically according to eternal generation, the other metaphorically Mother and Father according to the temporal generation, which is inconsequent here that the common term Father, Mother may be equally attributed to God and the Blessed Virgin as if they were both hermaphrodites. And that's from Alfonso de Fargas Toletani actually had that Jesuit creed.
Interesting. Yeah, I did not know that.
Yep. So, kind of going forward from here, it's interesting to see the world's reaction. You have even people that were historically at odds with Pope Francis are going to be going to his funeral, paying homage, paying respect to Pope Francis. Trump has made no secret that he was not a huge fan of Pope Francis, and yet he's going to be going to the funeral.
He's also written an executive order, like the day that the Pope died or the day after, that all the U.S. flags need to be hung.
Half-mast.
Yeah, half-mast.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I was like, that's really interesting, given that the history of the country is that, like, no, we don't want the Jesuits even in our country.
Yeah.
When did it happen last time? It was when another president died, right? Like, which is your own countryman, the leader of your people. And now it's like, different country, Vatican is a country.
Right.
And his wife is also Catholic.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yep.
He's telling you who his master is.
Well, that's the other interesting thing, is that you look at the presidents of the whole world, every single time a new president comes in of the United States, they go visit the Vatican at some point, and they come and visit them. And if you look at when Trump and Melania and Ivanka Trump and her husband all visited visited the Pope, the ladies were dressed in black with black veils.
Yeah,
If you look up the reasoning behind it, there's actually Catholic sources that say, well, this is a way to humble yourself in front of the Pope. And it's only royal women, and I think they have to have been born into the Catholic faith, something like that can be dressed in white. And it's like an honor, but the Pope has to grant you the honor. So there's a lot of control, and there's a lot of power that the Pope has over world leaders, the same way as we're seeing in the Dark Ages.
Interesting. Yeah,
Didn't know that.
Well, and I'm sure you guys probably saw that J.D. Vance was one of the last people to meet with Pope Francis.
He's a Catholic.
He's Catholic. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for that meeting. I don't think we'll ever know what was really said in it.
And they've been highly critical of each other because of the immigration policies, especially here recently. So, this is not, yes, he's Catholic, but that's not like, at least the appearance is that they weren't friends. Yet here he goes to pay homage to him right before he dies.
You have Biden, who also said, he was an open fan of Pope Francis, so this isn't exactly a surprising headline.
How she's dressed in black again, has like a veil, everything.
That's very interesting.
That's interesting, yeah. You had Barack Obama, who talked about how he was a rare leader, who, basically, talking about how good of a person he was. So, but not everybody was so positive. So you actually had Marjorie Taylor Greene here, and right after the Pope died, she I think it was on X, she said that evil is being defeated by the hand of God. Now, she didn't say any names. She wasn't like, oh, Pope Francis died and this is what happened. She just said evil is being defeated by the hand of God.
But like right after he died.
Like right after.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting is as a result of that, there's a Catholic group calling for Marjorie Taylor Greene's censure over Pope Francis' comments. And so read this little snippet right here. In this letter, Catholic League President William Donahue said Greene had a history of slandering Catholics, and they had previously asked the committee to sanction Greene for comments she made in 2022. Donahue said that Greene's recent post about defeating evil was aimed at the Holy Father. I'm writing to you in my capacity as president of the nation's largest Catholic civil rights organization. I have one request. Do what you can to have Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene censured, Donahue said.
So much for making religion a test of office, right?
Right.
Doesn't the Constitution warn about that?
Well, exactly, but the most ironic part of it is this is coming from somebody who's a Catholic civil rights leader. And so it's like, okay, so there's no free speech, right? Now, I'm not saying I agree with, immediately coming out with like some kind of hurtful comment. Like, I'm not saying I agree with 100% of Marjorie Taylor Greene, but I'm just saying, like, to have an anonymous post that's not aimed at anybody, it doesn't name anybody, and then just say, oh, we got to censure her. Like, what?
Yeah.
Like, that's not free speech.
I agree with you that free speech goes both ways.
Right.
Right? Like, if we have so many people in the comments who regularly say, I don't agree with you. I know you guys do too.
Right.
That's okay.
That's okay.
You can do that.
Right. But overall, the majority of people were talking about how beneficial his legacy was. There's all kinds of different faith leaders who were saying that he made his mark. And there's even the Living Lutheran right here. In particular, we will remember Pope Francis for his significant contributions to the dialogue of life between Lutherans and Catholics, advancing the joint declaration on the doctrine of justification. We will recall with amazement his participation alongside the Lutheran World Federation in a joint ecumenical commemoration of the 500th anniversary of the Reformation on October 31st, 2016. So, one of the big things that we have to highlight of Pope Francis' legacy is his ecumenism. How he tried to unite everybody. And a lot of people will say that's a positive thing. I mean, we have a picture here of him. They were showing him the Quran, right? And he's sitting there allowing this person to speak to him about that, as a world leader.
Francis made a statement basically against them burning the Quran, and basically said you shouldn't burn any book that's considered holy by, a group of people. Coming from the institution that did mass book burnings and tried to keep people from reading the Bible, being literate.
Yep.
And they're promoting this. This is in the name of ecumenicalism, right? But do we really think once they get everybody together and this ecumenical movement gets to wherever they're trying to lead it, do you think they're still going to allow that level of freedom?
Nope. We've already seen that with Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Exactly.
Right. We have Russian President Vladimir Putin, who also has voiced his condolences. And throughout the years of his pontificate, he actively promoted the development of dialogue between the Russian Orthodox and the Roman Catholic churches. Again, having that sentiment of ecumenism, trying to bring everybody together under one banner, basically. You also had Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, a respected statesman. Pope Francis was also a spiritual leader who valued dialogue between different faith groups. There it is. Everybody recognized that he had deep ecumenical ties all over the place.
And this guy is supposedly, I'm assuming, being the president of Turkey, he's probably Muslim.
But I think it's important to remember, Walter Vyeth actually has a very good video on this in the Total Onslaught series that shows, at least makes a case, that the Muslim religion came out of Catholicism.
Yes.
That's an interesting
so they're not as far apart as you may think.
And he also shows how the structure of how these secret societies came about. Again, the Jesuits were overseeing the Freemasons, and the Knights Templars came before all of that, which is also a Catholic order. But how in that whole structure of all of these different secret societies, you can also find Muslim secret societies as well, and in line or in context of these Catholic secret societies.
Christianity and the secret societies, we could just summarize it as follows. The old Babylonian religion gave rise to Kabbalism. Via the Essenes and others, Gnosticism came into existence, and Gnosticism was founded by Simon Magus. This comes from no other source than History de la Magie and by Eliphas Levi. Wow, that's a high Masonic source. So Gnosticism founded by Simon Magus. Then this Gnosticism, with its secret doctrine, was eventually, over time, through many intermediary organizations, carried over to the Knights Templars. And the Knights Templars were a group of a Roman Catholic order, if you like, that were set over the temple site to protect it. And they had strong links to Islamic societies, the Ismailis, the Karmatites, the Fatimites, the Druzes, and the Assassins. And these are very, very interesting, and we'll be dealing with them when we talk about the Islamic connection, what the secret societies actually teach. Just like the Templars had two doctrines, one for the Goyim, the uninitiated, and one for the insiders, and the two diametrically opposed to each other, so the secret societies of Islam do exactly the same thing. But that's another lecture. Now the Templars, they had their secret inner information inculcated in the Rosicrucians and the Jesuits. The Jesuits, again, formed and created Freemasonry. And Freemasonry was created as the Protestant arm of the Roman Catholic Church. Unbeknown to them, beguiled, fooled, if you like, into doing the work that Rome wanted them to do, so that Rome could sit in the background while Freemasonry did it for them. And then it wasn't them, it was them. And it was mainly Protestants that were doing it, and not Rome. Very clever. Very, very clever indeed.
Interesting.
And I talked to someone who went to Israel within the last few years, and they basically said their interaction with some of the Muslim Arabs over there, they're a lot more friendly towards Catholics than they are Christians of other denominations.
Well, it's interesting. If you go back to Burke McCarty's book, The Suppressed Truth of the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, she talked about when the Jesuits had been kicked out of Japan by the shoguns, that they were re-entering under the guise of Muslim clerics.
Interesting.
Okay. So they have a history of utilizing them to their ends.
Ultimately, all roads point to Rome. Would that be fair? Yeah.
You had the Iran president who congratulated Pope Francis on the birth of Jesus Christ, which is really interesting.
Which is fascinating, because again, Iran? Like,
exactly.
They hate Christianity. They will cut you down if you speak against their government.
Look they're both in a room together, and they're both speaking at the Vatican.
Yep. Well, these two are different. This
one though is Pope Francis, Iranian president, meet face to face at the Vatican.
Yes. And then this guy here, he's the next president who came after the one on the right. And then he congratulates the Pope Francis on the birth of Jesus Christ. So very odd.
Right. And you had the Dubai Sikh, Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, talking about his legacy of humility and interfaith unity. Mm-hmm. So you have all these different people recognize him as bringing people together. Is there anything wrong with that?
Well, from a Bible prophecy perspective, the harlot of Revelation 17 has many pearls. But per contra, in the gospel, there's one pearl of great price. So when you got this ecumenical movement with all of these different religions, and ultimately not condemning or calling out sin, but accepting everybody, you're downgrading the requirements of God's law. You're downgrading the definition of truth.
You also had here the LWF giving thanks to the life and legacy of Pope Francis. and they urged Lutherans and Catholics to move forward together with confidence as pilgrims of hope.
Where did the Lutherans come from? Martin Luther, who protested against the system.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, just piggybacking off of what you were saying about the ecumenicalism and if it's okay or not, a lot of people say, well, Jesus said he wants everybody to be united, which it's true, but if you read the context of John 17, it says, sanctify them by your truth, your word is truth.
Right.
So if our unity is not based on truth, which is the word of God, we cannot unite, right? We want to be united in Jesus, and Jesus, according to John 1, is the Word.
Right.
And the Word, according to John 17, is truth.
But, you do have this big push. You have Christianity Today saying that Pope Francis was the friend to evangelicals. So, this has been a concept, a theme that you've been seeing over the last several years. I have a clip here from Tony Palmer, and he's talking to some Lutherans here about the Protestant Reformation and their protest. So let's watch this just real quick.
And pastor friends, if there is no more protest, how can there be a Protestant church? Maybe we're all Catholics again. But we are Reformed. We're Catholic in the universal sense. We are not protesting the doctrine of salvation by the Catholic Church anymore. We now preach the same gospel. We now preach you are saved by grace through faith alone. The word alone was the argument for 500 years. The word alone is there. You can read it yourself. The protest is over. The protest is over.
So James, what do you think about his assertion there that they're saved by faith alone?
Not only the Council of Trent teaches in opposition, but also so does the Catechism as well.
Right, and so it goes back to that earlier argument that we were talking about at the very beginning about how that was the sticking point, where if you believed in faith alone, you were anathema. We discussed that at the beginning of the presentation. We've seen a lot of changes in the Catholic Church over the years. This is kind of what you think of when you think of the Roman Catholic Church. You have all these priests here, and you have this pomp, this circumstance, this, all these different traditions that are associated with it. What kind of stands out to you in this picture?
The red and purple.
The red and purple, right? Mm-hmm. So where do we find that kind of concept of red and purple? Does that ring any bells?
Isn't it Revelation 17?
It's Revelation, and it talks about how there is purple and scarlet, right? And so we know that the Roman Catholic Church, as Protestants, we recognize the Roman Catholic Church as a fulfillment of Bible prophecy, specifically. That it is that beast that would seek to wear out the saints, right? In addition to that, a lot of people have forgotten what Catholicism sort of looked like, felt like over the years. It was traditional to have the most pomp, the most circumstance, the most ornate. And these are kind of not the best photos because they're very old, because you don't see this stuff much anymore. You might see it in a museum if you go to it, but you don't see this as a representation of the current Catholic Church. You have these tiaras, these crowns that would make even the most rich earthly monarch jealous, right? With all studded with jewels. You have these robes just decked out in gold. You have, these popes would be carried around on these biers carried by people down below. Did you ever see Pope Francis doing this?
No, did not.
Right. Even more recently, when you have had deaths of other popes, you see them decked out with, the ornate robes. And I don't know, you can recognize some of our former presidents here, multiple of them actually, kneeling in front of the Pope, which is interesting. But instead you have Pope Francis, who most traditionally was seen in white, a simple cap. So the question is, has the Catholic Church changed? Has it made it, we had Vatican II in the 1960s, right? We had this large meeting that took place where they decided where they were going, where the trajectory of the Catholic Church was going. And you had a lot of things that were done away with at the time. The Latin Mass was abolished, and you've actually had new styles of singing that have come about. You know, back then you would typically have the typical, you know, kind of ethereal Catholic cathedral kind of, you know, singing without instruments or maybe just a pipe organ. But now you've had the addition of like traditional regular music, right? There's videos out there of Catholic priests, you know, going on stage with drums and guitars and everything else. You've had this adapting of it to the modern age. But does that mean that any of the principles contained therein have changed?
If you take one look at the architecture of Rome, that was her modus operandi all along, was to join together and syncretize with the surrounding religions and paganism and incorporate that within her religion. So if you go back to, you know, all of the Assyrian and Babylonian artifacts, all of that back in the history of Rome, it was always to syncretize with other religions. And so when you see the modern world shifting this direction, Rome's just going to go right along with it.
Right. So it's kind of like a chameleon changing its spots to kind of fit in with the new landscape, if you will.
But we want to be careful there, because the Bible teaches that can a leopard change its spots? And it describes this beast power in Revelation as having leopard-like spots, indicating therefore that the underlying principles of Rome do not change. Her bloody character in the past is the same today, and when given opportunity, she will commit those same crimes again.
Right.
Yeah. And we should also remember the Jesuit order was an order in secret, right? So now some people are openly Jesuit, but their practices are still secret, and some are Jesuit and you won't even know it. But that was an order that was supposed to, like you were saying, like a chameleon, right? Like they will become like the Protestants on the outside and do all the good works and do all the good things and show this humility, but it's all this a guise to pull people back to Roman Catholicism. I think Francis, unfortunately, has done a very great job of doing that.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people are like, oh, well, he's different and he is humble and all those things, when as a Jesuit pope, this is what he's supposed to do.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he also, you know, is one of the most liberal popes, if not the most liberal, progressive popes that we've ever had. And he was in the same time as we had Obama, right? And so we had this huge shift to the left globally as well.
Right.
And now we're shifting back hard to the right. You have
at least with our president. Yeah.
Well, across the world, you have
Yeah,
Argentina with Javier Milei. You have Italy as well, Germany. I mean, you have this huge shift to the right, and so I really think that you're going to have an incredibly conservative candidate that becomes the next pope. That's my guess. That will be a very conservative candidate, which lines up with Bible prophecy. If we are where we think we are at the end of time, there should be this huge swing to the right.
One of the things Pope Francis was known for is his encyclicals, and one of his biggest and most well-known encyclicals was Laudato Si. And Laudato Si was an encyclical about climate change and care for our common home, basically about how climate change was ruining the world. And he proposed a lot of different solutions in this long article that he wrote. And there was actually a lot of hubbub about this encyclical. There was people that made whole movies about it. There was all kinds of commentary and dialogue about this in a lot of different world settings. One of the concepts that he introduced, though, was the concept of a weekly Earth Sabbath. And so he talks about basically encouraging people to take one day off to pause so that their rest was all syncretized basically on one day for the care of our common home. Basically trying to reduce carbon emissions, reduce, you know, consumerism and everything else for one day out of the week. Does this, James, what do you think? Does this concern us as Protestant Christians?
So in Revelation 14, we know there's a warning about false worship, a false image, name, and mark, corresponding to the first 4 commandments of the Decalogue. And Protestants have long recognized, you go back to Thomas Tillam, Peter Chamberlain, George Carlo, and many others, recognizing Sunday as a counterfeit to God's true 4th commandment. And so it's interesting to see him start to push this rhetoric. We have long expected Protestant America to lead out in pushing for that at the end of time. And they are starting to do that with Project 2025. There was a video that we did on that discussing how we're seeing initiatives like that under a conservative administration beginning to go that direction. Heritage Foundation is pushing that direction, but we've also seen, we talked earlier about J.D. Vance. One of the presentations he did with the St. Franciscan University of Steubenville, there was Dr. Chad Pecknold, who was calling for Sunday rest legislation by law there as well. The book that he wrote, the foreword for Kevin Roberts with the Heritage Foundation, Dawn's Early Light, you can see J.D. Vance talking about, or at least in that book, referencing the Sabbath rest there as well. So it's interesting to see how Pope Francis's push here is being heard.
His second, or his next encyclical was Fratelli Tutti. What did you think about Fratelli Tutti? Did you read it?
Yeah, I actually, if I remember correctly, read a leaked German copy a few hours before it was officially released back in the day, because I was really curious to see what he promoted in it. But you can see where he's reaching across the aisle to the Grand Imam of LSR and starting to promote unity there as well. I believe that at the end of time, the devil is marshaling his forces to join everybody together, and we see that there's a conflict between the woman of Revelation 17, all her daughters, and a remnant in Revelation 14:12, those who keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus.
What's the percentage of Catholics currently in the United States? Like, how much of the population do they make up?
I just happened to look this up before we came on. It's about 20 to 22%.
Okay. So
America.
about a fifth of the United States is Catholic. But if you look at our Supreme Court justices, and this is our current set of judges here, right? Look at their faiths. Catholic, 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 Catholic Anglican, Catholic, 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 Protestant, arguably, Jewish. Now, some of these are better Catholics than other Catholics, but the one that's Anglican, he says that he's Anglican now. He grew up as Catholic, and then he studied as a Jesuit.
Oh.
And so then he went to becoming. So it's like, well, is he really Anglican or is he just hiding? Like,
What?
So, you have this huge percentage of our Supreme Court is made up of Catholics. Why? They're only 20 to 22%, and yet 7 out of 9 of them are Roman Catholic. Mm-hmm. You see Trump surrounding himself with Catholics. You have even the VP is Catholic. And who's that sitting there right next to him, James? Do you recognize that face?
Kevin Roberts.
Kevin Roberts, yeah.
Yeah, he runs currently the Heritage Foundation and has been a huge voice in creating Project 2025, which wants to, I guess we could say, it's laying the groundwork for future Sunday legislation.
Right, and the thing is a lot of people will say, well, you're just sitting on one side of the aisle or the other, and I'm not coming at this from a Republican or Democratic side. Mm-hmm. I'm coming at this from a Protestant side. Mm-hmm. If you look at Biden, he also had a heavily Catholic influence as well. He was Catholic. Mm-hmm. And when he was on as president, there was also a lot of Supreme Court justices who were Catholic. Yeah.
I personally never expressed my political views on this channel because I believe the gospel is for everyone.
Right.
But people have come after us saying, you're a Democrat. And I'm like, I'm not saying whatever I am, but I am coming at this, like you said, from a Protestant point of view. And I would say a conservative, biblical point of view.
Yes.
I'm not liberal, I'm not Democratic, I'm not Republican.
Right.
But I am a Bible-believing Christian. Exactly.
I'm a Christian, right, yeah. So, I don't want to find myself labeled on either side of the aisle, if that makes sense. But, there's a lot of commentary here about how Trump's Catholic cabinet, how will their faith shape their work? You talk about Trump's cabinet would be comparable to what has been called the most Catholic cabinet in history. His predecessor, Joe Biden's, more than a third of Trump's nominees are Catholic. Mm-hmm. So we know that there's this massive push towards Catholicism that has happened. Has that always been the case in our country? Have we always seen Catholics in positions of high power?
I mean, before Biden, the only other prior president that was Catholic was JFK.
So, if you talk about JFK, this is a news article right here from a newspaper that is from 1959. And it talks about Senator John F. Kennedy will announce his White House aspirations in December against a background of debate on whether a Catholic should be elected president. So back when he was becoming president, there was this overall sentiment in America that, should we really have a Catholic leader? Or is he going to be trying to push Catholic views, Catholic doctrine, submitting to the Pope for the whole country? And so JFK famously distanced himself, and he believed in complete separation of church and state and said, my Catholic views are never going to come into the forefront of my presidency. Those are not going to influence me.
He was very open that the papacy would have no influence on his presidency whatsoever. He also spoke out against secret societies.
Well, shortly after that, he was assassinated. So, I mean, we can kind of see where that landed. But, how do we view this going forward? A pope has died. Does that mean that anything significant changes? Are we looking at the papacy? Are we looking at, who's the next pope going to be? That's what's really going to seal it. That's what's going to tell us what's going on. I would wager no. I would wager what we should be looking at is where America is headed. Right? We know that and we actually did a previous episode talking about how Washington, D.C. kind of mirrors Rome, right?
Oh, tons. Yeah.
And you recently went to Washington,
yes.
D.C. Did you see it while you were there?
I saw it, and I saw even more things that wasn't even discussed in that episode. I was like, wow, it is everywhere. And a lot of those things that we discussed that you see here in both in Rome and D.C. are actually references to sun worship.
Yeah, very much so. But, we know that there is a beast spoken of in Revelation. And that's not the beast. The first beast is not the one that brings about the mark of the beast. It's the second beast. It's the lamb-like beast with horns that speaks as a dragon. That's the one that brings about the mark of the beast crisis.
Yeah, if you go back to the early stages of American history, like John Bacon and Isaac Backus, there were a couple of Protestants whose works I actually obtained recently from the Library of Congress, which has both copies of both of their works. They identified the second beast of Revelation 13 as the United States of America. So from the very foundation of this country, Protestants have recognized that the United States is the second beast power of Revelation.
And if you think about it, a lamb-like beast that looks innocent, right? But it speaks like a dragon. Speaking denotes authority, so it gets its authority from the dragon. And look at all of our political leaders that are going and paying homage to the Pope across the world, but especially Americans, our merchants as well. Why would Elon Musk go and meet with the Pope?
That power had two horns that did not have crowns on them, symbolic of religious and civil liberty. No pope, no king in this country.
Right.
But it's a Republican country. It's one that has had freedom for a long time. But it speaks like a dragon.
Well, you also study further in Revelation, you find out there are daughters of the harlot. And they go back and they support the harlot, right? And so we know that those daughters, women in Bible prophecy, are a representation of a church. So if you have a harlot, we know that that's the main mother church, right? And the Catholic Church has long held that it's the mother church. They just come out and said that, right?
Yeah, it's literally inscribed outside of St. John of Lateran, mater.
Right.
Mater.
So it is the mother church.
Yeah.
So then who are the daughters that support it? Well, it's all these Protestant denominations that have kind of, we went away, but now we're going to go back. We're going to ecumenically come together.
What's interesting from Pope Francis's legacy is because he went liberal like he did, there has been a backlash in the United States of a lot of traditional Catholics who want to return to traditional values. And some of the rhetoric coming out of those channels, like Michael Voris with Church Militant, is a call to bring back the Inquisition, to call religious liberty a snake coiled up under the table here in the United States. In other words, the backlash from Pope Francis, and this may have been intentional, is to reinvigorate those traditionalists who would be more than happy to come along and take away liberty, because at the end of the day, Rome called religious liberty and mirari vos and quanta cura a pest, insanity, a delirimentum. Religious liberty to Rome is a pest.
Right.
And that goes back to Gregory in Mirari Vos and Pope Pius IX's Quanta Cura encyclical, the errors of liberalism.
Yeah, so, I think this is a lot of food for thought for a lot of people, and I just want to mention again, for those at home who want to do a deeper study into this, we got a whole video literally just looking at scripture as to who the Antichrist is, which we believe as Protestants, and this is an ancient belief among Protestants, among reformers, among many of the former reformers, out of which came all these various denominations. They all believed the papacy, the seat of the papacy, not Pope Francis, but the seat of the papacy is the Antichrist. So we got a video on that, link in description. We got a video on what we believe the mark of the beast is according to scripture as well. We got a video on how the second beast in Revelation 13 is in fact the United States, and how they will be part of enforcing the mark of the beast. And we got even a video on who the pilgrims believed the Antichrist was, the pilgrims coming to the United States, and also on what 666 actually means, and the Babylonian Baal origins